Chapter 5. Sunny hitched a ride with Dad on the first day of school because she had morning band practice. She's the best flute player in the band because nobody else willingly spends their entire summers practicing their band instrument nonstop. My parents wanted me to join band, too, but I flat out refused simply because there was no way I was going to wake up extra early every morning. My parents used to make us both give music recitals during their dinner parties. I learned to play the recorder in second grade, and whenever we had company over, Sunny would give a performance after dinner, and then my parents would make me play the recorder. After a few dinner parties, my parents stopped asking me to play because Sunny was playing these really hard classical pieces, and it just made me look stupid. Later, Drew and I turned my recorder into a sweet fireworks launcher. The holes in the recorder are the perfect size for bottle rockets. Drew's dad secretly gives him fireworks whenever he visits, so we asked for a recorder last Christmas. That way we could really battle it out in the woods behind his house. Drew lives a couple of blocks away from Fenwick Middle School, so we'd be walking directly from his house every day. This was good news because I'd always hated riding the bus back in elementary school. It smelled like exhaust fumes, and there weren't any seatbelts. I've never understood that about adults. They yell at us all the time about wearing our seatbelts, but they think nothing of us riding twice a day in a big yellow bus that doesn't even have armrests, let alone seatbelts. It's weird because I hate wearing my seatbelt when I ride in cars, but on buses you'll find me pressing my knees against the seat in front of me to make me feel more secure in case we get T-boned by a semi. It was chilly out as I walked over to Drew's house, but I'd forced myself to wear a t-shirt and no jacket because I used to overdress back in elementary school. By lunchtime, I'd be sweating like crazy, even in the middle of winter, and on top of that, I lost 3 winter jackets in 5th grade alone. I hadn't figured it would be this cold out in the mornings, though. "I can see you shivering from here," Drew said when I showed up. "Why aren't you wearing a jacket?" "I don't want to talk about it," I snapped, "and it's rude to stare at someone when they're in this much physical pain." "Do you want to borrow my jacket?" he suggested. "Sure, thanks," I said, whipping off my backpack. I zipped up his jacket, and a couple of seconds later I felt nice and toasty. Now Drew was the one shivering. "You look really cold." "Can I have my jacket back?" I glared at him. "You're not going to grow up to be one of those adults who give homeless people $1 and then a second later ask for it back because you suddenly want a soda or something. What adult does that?" "Plenty, and the homeless hate their guts." "Fine, keep the stupid jacket," he said, rubbing his hands together. "I heard stomping your feet warms you up," I suggested. He started stomping his feet as we walked to school. "It's working! Thanks for the tip." "Don't mention it." A minute later we were staring at the main entrance to the school. I suddenly felt a pile of dead frogs in my stomach as I pictured a lobby full of older kids. I turned to Drew. He looked like he had dead frogs in his stomach too. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "No, I'm just really cold." I glared at him. "You know it makes me feel bad when you keep saying things like that." "Sorry," he said. Drew can be pretty insensitive sometimes, but his heart's in the right place, so I try not to judge him for it. "So, are you scared about going in there?" "Who said anyone was scared?" I said. Drew just looked at me with unblinking eyes. It's a fact that best friends can talk with their eyes, and his eyes were telling me 2 things. "Peter, I totally understand," and "Peter, I really want my jacket back." "Come on, let's head inside," I said quickly so he wouldn't ask for his jacket back again, and he followed me up to the double doors. The lobby was full of students, and I was shocked at how big everyone looked. Not just the older kids, everyone from our grade seemed bigger too. Apparently Drew and I missed a summer field trip to a cornfield where a pulsing meteor landed or something, because everyone in our grade, even the girls, had grown a lot over the summer. I counted 5 boys in my grade with beginner mustaches, and 2 girls for that matter. "Who should we tell first about our mica collection?" Drew asked me. "Don't tell anyone just yet," I said. "Play it cool. Let's get a feel for how much mica everyone collected over the summer, just in case someone collected more. Then we can sneak home during recess and collect more." "Do you think somebody actually beat us?" "Of course not, but it would be foolish not to allow for the possibility." "You have a point," Drew admitted. "There's Trent." Trent and his basketball buddies, Lance and Paul, were standing by the fire exit. Back in elementary school, Trent and his buddies were considered kind of weird because every day at recess, instead of playing kickball with all of us normal people, they shot hoops by themselves the entire time. Trent looked like he'd grown a foot. They were standing with 2 other guys I didn't recognize. We walked over to them. "You grew a lot this summer," I said to Trent. "It's called puberty," Trent said. "You guys should try it sometime." "But seriously, you must be the biggest kid in school already." For some reason, Trent didn't take this as a compliment and laughed at me. "This is Kyle and Mark. They went to Hemingway," Trent said. I played on the same rec league hoops team this summer. And for your information, those are the two biggest kids in school, Lance said, pointing over at two identical twins in the corner. They looked like adult mechanics or something, and I couldn't help but turn away when they glanced in our direction. And you shouldn't go near them. Who are they? Drew asked. Only the two biggest bullies in school. Meet Hank and Hugh Sweet, a.k.a. the Sweet Brothers. Kyle said, I heard the school board over the summer tried to make it official that the brothers held the world record for most detentions in a row, but the Guinness Book of World Records rejected the claim because they didn't want to reward criminals. Dude, that's crazy, I said, gaping at Drew. Note to self, must not ever get detention, Drew said in a funny robot voice, and I giggled. Yeah, no kidding, and I'll pretend you didn't just talk in a stupid robot voice, Lance replied, and I casually changed my giggling to coughing. He added, anyway, they were the two biggest bullies in school last year, too. So what'd you guys do all summer? Trent asked Drew. Funny you should ask, he started saying with a big smile on his face, but I cut him off. Nothing really, I said, glaring at Drew. So Trent, did you do anything besides play hoops like a weirdo all summer? Did you spend any time in, say, the woods? Huh? Trent said, and his two Hemingway pals just stared at me as if I'd just asked the dumbest question ever. The bell rang and everyone started heading upstairs to classrooms. Jackpot, I whispered to Drew, and he stared at me funny too. Why would Trent spend any time in the woods? What's in the woods? Don't you get it? I said. He totally forgot all about the Micah contest because he was too busy playing basketball all summer. And he's our main competition. This is turning out better than I expected. Oh, that is good news. And one more thing, I added. Don't ever use that robot voice with those guys again. You're embarrassing both of us. Sorry, Drew blushed. You should have told me it wasn't the right moment to bust it out. I assumed you knew, I said, not looking at him. Drew and I had homeroom together because our last names are close together. The school's set up like this. The lobby and the gym and teacher's lounge are out front, facing the parking lot on one side and a soccer field on the other. The academic wing of the school is behind this section. It's 2 floors and completely circular with classrooms on the outside. On the inside of the second floor is the library, and on the first floor, the middle, is the cafeteria and auditorium. We got to room 27, and our homeroom teacher, Mr. Davis, handed us our class schedules. We compared them and discovered we didn't have any classes together. I groaned. This was bad news. I'd never had a class without Drew in it up to this point. It was kind of like we were teammates in class back in elementary school. At least we have homeroom and lunch together, Drew said. We grabbed some seats near the back. The human calculator and his brainiac pals were sitting in a cluster behind us. How was your summer? I asked him in a robot voice, winking at Drew so he could see this was one of those situations where a robot voice made perfect sense. I talk like that to Carson to secretly make fun of him for being a nerd. He never gets it, which means he's not nearly as smart as everyone thinks. I visited my grandparents in Mexico City for most of it, he said. What kind of rock formations do they have in Mexico City? I asked. How would you care? Are you a geologist or something? Just curious, and for the record, yes, I probably am a geolo whatever you just called me, I said, winking at Drew. It seemed like everyone had forgotten about the Micah contest. We'd win just by default, which was fine by me. Sally Leathers was also in our homeroom. In 4th grade, all the girls worshipped Sally because she was really fast. During one recess, she actually beat Trent and some other guys in a race. But then in 5th grade, she gave up her running career to focus on riding horses, and as a result, her legs weakened and she fell to the 3rd fastest girl in the grade. And people just weren't as crazy about her as before. She looked different, I noticed. Not just taller, but she was wearing makeup and looked older than us. What'd you do this summer? I asked Sally. Besides aging 10 years. It was boring. I hung out at the pool every day, but I met my new BFF, Angie. She went to Hemingway, Sally said, pointing at the girl next to her. Hi, I said to Angie, and she just kind of stared back at me. What about you guys? Sally asked. Drew looked at me. I figured Trent and his basketball buds spent the entire summer playing hoops, and Carson spent his time in Mexico City, and it sounded like everyone else hung out at the pool, so I assumed we definitely collected the most mica. Everyone was paying attention to us, so I figured it was a good time to make the official announcement. I nodded at him. Pete and I more than doubled our mica collection, he said. At first nobody said anything. You guys collect mica? Angie asked. That's what we do at our school, I reminded her. I guess you don't have any on your side of town. Drew and I had the most at the end of the summer, or at the end of the year, but we barely had 30 pieces, remember, Sally? Nobody plays with mica anymore, Pete, Carson snickered. That is so 5th grade. Everyone laughed. We don't play with it, Drew shouted. Micah's not a toy. If you knew anything about it, you'd know you have to be really careful with it. And besides, you don't... Thankfully, the bell rang for first period, so Drew couldn't continue doing what he mistakenly thought was effective damage control. Everyone raced out of the room, including Drew, so I sat back in my seat thinking about what Carson had said. So 5th grade? What was that supposed to mean?